In 1883, a group of 18 hunters ventured into the heart of the Blackwood Forest and never returned. Whispers of a curse have lingered for over a century, with strange shadows seen at dusk and eerie echoes that seem to follow you through the trees. Locals speak of a presence, unseen but watching, that guards the forest against intruders. Some claim to have found remnants of old campfires, frozen arrows and broken hunting tools, yet not a single trace of the men themselves. Tonight we uncover their story, a chilling journey through fear, superstition, and the unknown. Were the hunters victims of a dark secret hidden in the woods, or did something far more sinister stalk them? What we discover will challenge everything you think you know about the forest. Disclaimer: this story is purely fictional and intended for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real events or people is coincidental. Chapter 1. The Whispering Woods. The year was 1883, and the Blackwood Forest loomed like a dark sea beyond the last cottages of the small village of Ravens Hollow. 18 hunters had gathered at dawn, their leather boots crunching on frost-covered leaves, rifles slung over shoulders, eyes glinting with ambition and the thrill of the hunt. They spoke little, letting the misty morning wrap them in uneasy silence. Even the birds seemed to hush their songs, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Local legends had long warned travelers of the forest's strange ways. Some said that the trees whispered secrets to those who dared enter, that shadows moved of their own accord, and that a curse lingered over the forest, claiming anyone foolish enough to wander too far. The hunters laughed at the tales, men of skill and courage, they thought, laughing off what they called old wives' stories. But as they stepped under the dense canopy, the air grew heavier, and a subtle sense of being watched prickled their skin. The first hours passed uneventfully, the hunters setting up a small campsite near a brook that glimmered under the morning sun. Yet there was a strange quiet that refused to be filled. The leaves rustled softly, though no wind stirred them. Shadows flickered along the trunks, too deliberate to be natural. Some of the hunters noticed it, others ignored it, joking to calm their nerves. But deep inside, even the bravest felt a twinge of unease, like stepping into a world that existed between reality and something else, something darker. As night began to fall, the hunters gathered around their campfire. The flames danced in the encroaching darkness, throwing long, trembling shadows on the surrounding trees. They told stories to pass the time, tales of beasts and spirits, of hunters who had vanished without a trace. The fire crackled, punctuating each tale, while he missed from the brook curled around their boots. One hunter, older than the rest, paused mid-story and stared into the shadows beyond the firelight. "Do you feel it?" he whispered. "Like the forest is listening." Laughter broke the tension, but it was forced, brittle, fading quickly into uneasy glances. That night, none of them slept soundly. Strange noises echoed from the forest, soft footfalls, low whispers, a rustling that moved too quickly for any normal animal. And when the hunters closed their eyes, they dreamed not of victory or prey, but of empty woods, of trees that shifted and leaned, and of eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. The Whispering Woods had welcomed them, and it was already beginning its silent hunt. Next, we discover what strange secrets the hunters' campfire tales reveal, and why one old legend might be more than just a story. Chapter 2. Campfire Tales. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks dancing into the fog that hugged the edges of their campsite. The hunters sat in a rough circle, faces lit by the flickering flames, each man staring at the shadows as if they might leap out and snatch him into the woods. The older hunter, Thomas, cleared his throat and leaned forward, the glow of the fire reflecting in his tired eyes. "Before we go any deeper, you all should know what the forest holds," he began. The others leaned in, half in jest, half in curiosity, waiting for a story to pass the uneasy time. Thomas spoke of the Blackwood Forest as if it were alive, breathing in the cold wind and whispering to those who dared enter. "Many hunters have come before you," he said, "and not all have returned. Some vanish without a sound, some leave the forest forever changed. They say the trees themselves remember, and they do not forgive." His voice was low, rhythmic, pulling the men closer with a hypnotic weight. Even those who laughed at superstitions felt a chill settle over their spines. The younger hunters exchanged nervous glances. "All stories to scare children," one muttered, forcing a smile. But as Thomas continued, he revealed tales that were far from childish. He spoke of hunters who had followed game only to find themselves in the same clearing repeatedly, no matter which direction they ran. He spoke of shadows that moved with intent, whispering names no one else could hear. And then he spoke of the curse of Blackwood, a dark legend older than the village itself, of men who had angered the forest spirits and were claimed forever, leaving only their echoes behind. The men listened in tense silence, the firelight reflecting in their wide eyes. Even the skeptics felt the forest pressing close, as though it had leaned in to listen too. Thomas's gaze lingered on each of them, seeing theirs, her bravado crack under the weight of something unseen. "The forest remembers every footstep, every choice," he said softly. "Tonight, it watches you, judging if you will leave as men, or if it will take you, as it took those before." The hunters exchanged uneasy murmurs, the bravado fading like mist. Something in the rustling leaves seemed to answer Thomas's words, a whispering that could almost be human, just beyond comprehension. And as they settled into their tents, the fire dying to embers, a sense of foreboding settled over them. The forest was awake now, listening, waiting, and patient. That night, the hunters dreamed of things that should not exist. Glowing eyes behind trees, endless shadows stretching into impossible distances, and whispers calling their names with a familiarity that made their hearts race. No one spoke, but each knew that the stories Thomas told were not just tales. They were warnings. Next, we discover what the hunters find when they follow a mysterious trail in the forest, and why the missing map may hold the key to their fate. Chapter 3. The Missing Map. The morning sun struggled through the thick canopy of Blackwood forest, casting fragmented rays that barely touched the forest floor. The hunters emerged from their tents, stiff from a restless night, and gathered their gear. Today, they planned to explore deeper, following a trail rumored to lead to game-rich grounds. But something felt off. A subtle tension clung to the air, like a storm waiting to strike. Henry, the youngest of the hunters, reached into his pack for the map that would guide them through the twisting woods. But his fingers met only empty canvas. The map was gone. Panic flickered in his eyes as he patted down every bag, every pocket, searching frantically. It was right here," he stammered. His words hung in the air, swallowed almost immediately by the soft rustle of the trees. Others tried to calm him, but unease had already begun to seep into their bones. A missing map in a forest notorious for its tricks was no small matter. Thomas, ever the voice of reason, knelt and examined the surrounding area. "It couldn't have been stolen," he muttered, scanning the undergrowth. "No tracks, no signs of passage." His eyes narrowed. "Sometimes the forest itself takes what it wants." A low murmur of disbelief ran through the group, yet a few could not shake the feeling that the older man spoke truths they were not ready to face. They decided to move cautiously, relying on memory and instinct to navigate. Each step seemed heavier, the trees closing in, casting unnatural shadows. Paths they thought they knew twisted into unfamiliar directions. Even the sound of the brook, which had seemed so inviting yesterday, now gurgled with a strange, hollow resonance. The hunters began to notice small signs of disturbance, footprints leading nowhere, broken twigs arranged in patterns too deliberate to be accidental, and the odd feeling of boiteurs being watched from multiple angles at once. By mid-afternoon, tension had reached a peak. Arguments flared as frustration met fear. Some suggested retracing their steps to find the map, others insisted on pushing forward. And then came the first scream, a sharp, bone-chilling cry that tore through the forest like a knife. It came from the edge of the trail, where a cluster of oaks blocked the view. The hunters froze. Hearts pounding, rifles raised, they scanned the shadows, but nothing moved. Only the rustling leaves answered. It was clear now. The forest was testing them, and the missing map was just the beginning. Next, we discover the horrors that await the hunters on their first nightfall, and why the shadows of Blackwood seem to have a life of their own. Before we go deeper, understand this. This story isn't for everyone. If you're still here, you're one of the few who can face what America buried. Subscribe now, and tell me in the comments, what state are you listening from? And would you dare hear this story from your own backyard? Chapter 4. First nightfall. As dusk draped the Blackwood forest in shadows, the hunters gathered reluctantly around the dwindling embers of their fire. The sun had vanished behind thick, restless clouds, leaving a deep, unnatural darkness that seemed to swallow everything beyond the circle of light. Each snap of a twig, each rustle of leaves sounded amplified, echoing like whispers in their ears. The forest no longer felt passive. It was awake, watching, waiting. The hunters tried to speak, to laugh, to shake off the unease, but the tension was too thick. Even Henry, whose bright-eyed confidence had carried him this far, refused to meet anyone's gaze. The map remained missing, and a strange silence had settled over the woods, broken only by a low, rhythmic rustling from the underbrush. It sounded almost deliberate, as though someone, or something, was moving just beyond the light. As night fell completely, a sudden scream ripped through the darkness, a cry sharp enough to stop every heartbeat. The hunters froze, eyes wide, rifles trembling in their hands. Thomas motioned for silence, straining to catch any hint of movement. A shadow darted between the trees, too quick, too fluid, leaving only a fleeting sense of motion. When the hunters finally dared to step forward, they found nothing, just disturbed leaves and the lingering echo of fear. They tried to convince themselves it was a fox, a deer, or perhaps another hunter playing a cruel joke. But deep down, they knew better. The forest did not joke. Whispers seemed to crawl across the tree trunks, voices that no one could place, murmuring their names, mocking their courage. One by one, the hunters realized that the woods were more than dark and dense. They were alive, and they did not welcome intruders. Thomas gathered them close, his face grim. "Tonight," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "is the first test, the fee. Orest is not what it seems. Keep the fire alive, stay together, do not wander." His words barely settled before another scream tore the night apart, closer this time, more urgent. Panic began to creep in, cold and suffocating. Some gripped their rifles tighter, others pressed close to friends, eyes darting in every direction. The fire flickered, and in that moment shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting and bending like living things. A sudden gust of wind extinguished the flames, plunging them into darkness. The whispers grew louder, almost chanting, and the hunters felt an icy presence brush past their shoulders. Fear had a voice now, and it was speaking directly to them. Next, we discover who vanishes first from the group, and why the forest's whispers are more than just wind. Chapter 5. The Vanished Hunter. The forest was silent in the aftermath of the night's terror, but the silence carried a weight far heavier than the darkness itself. The hunters had managed to relight the fire by morning, though their hands shook and their faces were pale with exhaustion. Every branch snapping underfoot, every rustle of leaves made them flinch, but nothing compared to the emptiness they would soon discover. It was James, the burly, confident hunter whose laughter had once filled the campsite, who was gone. One moment he had been there, adjusting his pack and scanning the forest edges. The next, nothing. No footprints, no signs of struggle, just an unsettling void where he had stood. The men called his name, their voices cracking in the cold morning air. The forest responded only with a soft, eerie echo, as if it were mocking them. Panic began to ripple through the group. Thomas's calm demeanor faltered, replaced by grim determination. "He wandered too far," he said, though his voice carried no real conviction. "Stay together. We search slowly, systematically. Nothing leaves this forest without a trace, not easily." But even he could feel the forest pressing in, the trees whispering threats in a language they could almost comprehend. The sense of being watched was no longer a feeling. It was a certainty. The hunters fanned out cautiously, rifles ready, eyes scanning every shadow. They followed the faint trail of broken twigs and disturbed leaves, signs that seemed to vanish the moment they were discovered. Every step felt heavier, as if the forest itself resisted their progress. And then, faintly, they heard it. A soft, muffled sob, followed by a sudden silence. When they reached the spot, James was gone, leaving behind only his hat, crushed in the underbrush. Fear now ruled the hunters' hearts. The forest had claimed its first victim, but it was far from done. Whispers seemed to echo from every direction, voices overlapping, urgent and incomprehensible. Every tree looked like it could be hiding movement, every shadow a predator. The men realized with sinking horror that the stories Thomas had told were true. Blackwood was alive, and it had marked them. They returned to camp, pale and shaken, gathering around the meager fire that now seemed fragile against the encroaching darkness. No one spoke of courage anymore. Only survival mattered. Each of them wondered silently if they too would vanish before the night ended. The forest was patient, but its hunger was methodical, and it would not be denied. Next, we discover the haunting laughter that follows the hunters through the forest, and why they begin to realize the shadows are far from natural. Chapter 6. Echoes of Laughter. The night fell swiftly over Blackwood Forest, wrapping the hunters in a cloak of darkness heavier than the cold air. After James's disappearance, the remaining 17 moved with caution, every footstep a careful negotiation with the unseen forces pressing in around them. The fire burned low, its orange glow barely holding back the blackness that seemed eager to consume them. Then it began. A soft, distant sound that made the blood drain from their faces. A laughter, low and hollow, echoing from deep within the trees. At first, they thought it might be one of their own, attempting some grim joke, but the sound carried a cadence no human voice could mimic. It rose and fell like wind weaving through the branches, punctuated with strange, almost deliberate pauses. Thomas held up his hand, signaling silence. The hunters froze. The laughter seemed to respond, circling them, moving closer, yet never revealing its source. "This isn't natural," he murmured. "It's feeding on fear." Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves now carried sinister intent. They were no longer simply in the forest. They were part of its game. The hunters clung together, whispers of old stories resurfacing in their minds. Tales of hunters who vanished, of shadows that followed too closely, of the forest itself playing tricks on those who dared enter. Eyes darted nervously, each man trying to catch a glimpse of the unseen. And then the laughter became sharper, cutting, almost mocking. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence. Something knew them. Something was toying with them. Attempts to rationalize the phenomenon failed. Every rational explanation, the wind, animals, fatigue, crumbled under the weight of what they felt. The shadows moved with purpose, always just out of reach, and the laughter, now layered with whispers, seemed to call out names. "Henry's knees, sir," Hook as he muttered. "It's calling us. It knows us." By midnight, fear had turned to dread. The hunters huddled closer around the embers of the fire, each man unwilling to move, unwilling to breathe too loudly. The forest seemed infinite, pressing in from all sides. Even the bravest felt powerless, realizing they had underestimated the forest's sentience. Blackwood had claimed its first victim, and it was only warming up. Next, we discover the cryptic symbols appearing among the trees, and why the hunters begin to understand that the forest is trying to communicate or trap them. Chapter 7. Signs in the Trees. Dawn broke, weak and grey, filtering through the dense canopy in feeble shafts of light that barely touched the forest floor. The hunters were exhausted. Sleep had evaded them all night. Their eyes, heavy with fear, scanned the trees as they trudged forward.
every snap of a branch or rustle of leaves a reminder of the unseen menace that stalked them. It was Henry who first noticed the marks. At eye level on the bark of an ancient oak, there were strange symbols, lines etched deep into the wood, jagged and uneven, almost as if carved by claws rather than human hands. The hunters gathered around, hearts hammering. "What is this?" whispered one, stepping closer. But the closer they got, the more symbols they found, etched along every tree lining the narrow path. Thomas knelt to examine them. "I've never seen markings like this," he admitted, tracing one symbol with a finger. "It's deliberate. They form a pattern. Some kind of warning, maybe." His voice trembled despite his attempt at authority. The rest of the hunters exchanged uneasy glances, realizing these were not random carvings. Someone, or something, was communicating with them. A sudden breeze rustled the branches, and for a fleeting moment, the symbols seemed to shimmer, almost alive. The hunters felt as though unseen eyes were studying their reactions, judging their fear. Whispers returned, soft and unintelligible, rising from the forest floor and twisting upward like smoke. The symbols were no longer just warnings. They were a part of the forest itself, a language the trees spoke silently to the living. Tension mounted as they moved cautiously along the path, each man aware of the forest's watchful presence. Every marking seemed to point somewhere, an uncharted glade, a deeper part of the woods where sunlight never reached. Yet each step felt heavier than the last. Even Thomas, Yususu, ally unshakable, admitted, "This forest is not natural. Every mark, every shadow, it's deliberate. It wants us to follow, or perhaps it wants to trap us." By midday, unease had morphed into a palpable dread. The hunters could no longer ignore the signs. Blackwood was alive, intelligent, and patient. Each carved symbol was a reminder that the forest had claimed James, and it would not stop until it had them all. Next, we discover the consequences of their broken compass and why the hunters realized that the forest refuses to let them find their way out. Chapter 8. Broken Compass. By late afternoon, the hunters realized that the forest had become a labyrinth. Every path they tried led them in circles, familiar clearings repeating themselves as though the woods were folding inward. Their confidence eroded quickly, replaced by an unnerving sense of being watched from all directions. Henry pulled the compass from his pocket, hoping for some guidance, but the needle spun wildly, jerking in impossible directions, ignoring the natural pull of the earth. "It's broken," he muttered, panic rising. Thomas snatched it from his hands, examining it closely. "No," he said slowly, voice tight with unease. "It's not broken. It's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave." The realization settled like ice in the hunter's veins. Blackwood was actively interfering, bending nature itself to trap them. The group tried to retrace their steps, following the symbols carved into the trees, but the markings themselves seemed to shift. One moment, a path appeared clear. The next, the same trees loomed differently, forming walls where there had been openings before. Whispers followed them relentlessly, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp, always mocking. The laughter from the previous night returned, now layered with strange, guttural noises that seemed almost human and almost animal. Tension fractured the group. Arguments erupted as fear overtook reason. Some wanted to push forward, to find escape at all costs. Others urged caution, fearful of straying into unseen traps. Amid the chaos, Thomas noticed something chilling. The shadows themselves were moving against the wind, creeping closer with each hesitant step. "The forest is alive," he said, voice low and trembling. "And it's learning us." By evening, desperation replaced caution. The hunters huddled together trying to make sense of the twisted terrain, the broken compass, the shifting paths, the carved symbols. They all pointed to the same terrifying truth. Blackwood was no ordinary forest. It was an entity, a predator, and they were prey. Every instinct screamed that the night ahead would not be forgiving. Next, we discover the hunter's fateful entry into the forbidden glade, and why curiosity may be the deadliest temptation of all. Chapter 9. The Forbidden Glade. The hunters moved cautiously, the broken compass useless in their trembling hands. Rumors of a place deep within Blackwood, known only as the Forbidden Glade, had reached their ears through Thomas's stories. A clearing untouched by sun, where trees grew unnaturally close, and the air was thick with a cold, oppressive energy. Some locals whispered that nothing left the glade alive. Others claimed it was where the forest's true power resided. Now, standing at its edge, the hunters understood why. The clearing was eerily still, an unnatural hush smothering the forest's usual sounds. No wind stirred the leaves, no birds sang, and even the brook that had guided them so far seemed to disappear. Shadows clung to the edges of the glade, stretching unnaturally, bending in ways that defied logic. The hunters instinctively formed a tight circle, rifles raised, hearts pounding in the suffocating silence. Henry stepped forward, curiosity overcoming fear. "Maybe the glade holds the way out," he whispered. Thomas shot him a sharp glance, his jaw tight. "Curiosity can kill you here," he warned. "The forest watches, and it punishes those who pry." But the forest seemed to beckon, calling them forward with the same whispers and laughter that had haunted their nights. Against their better judgment, the hunters advanced, each step heavier than the last. Within the heart of the glade, strange markings covered every tree, more intricate and deliberate than anything they had seen before. Some resembled faces, twisted in silent screams. Others formed patterns like eyes staring directly at them. The air was thick with an unseen pressure, a force that made every movement feel labored. One of the hunters froze, pointing at a patch of ground where the soil seemed to pulse like it had a heartbeat. No animal tracks, no signs of life, just the forest itself, alive, in a way that chilled them to the bone. As they pressed further, whispers swelled, overlapping into unintelligible chants. The hunters felt as if unseen hands brushed past their shoulders, tugging, testing, threatening. Shadows flitted at the edge of their vision, always gone when looked at directly. The glade was a trap, yes, but it was also a revelation. The forest had a consciousness, and it was teaching them, testing them, teasing the boundaries between life and disappearance. Next, we discover the ghostly visions one hunter experiences, and why the glade reveals truths that should have remained buried.
Did you know, throughout history, there have been real documented cases of people mysteriously disappearing in wilderness and forested areas, events that remain unresolved and perplexing to this day? One well-known research effort is the Missing 411 series by David Paulides, which compiles cases of people who vanished in national parks and remote landscapes across North America under unusual circumstances, often with little to no evidence explaining what happened. While mainstream scientific analysis does not confirm supernatural causes, investigators consistently note that many disappearances occur in areas where terrain is rugged, communication is limited, and search conditions are difficult. These real cases don't point to curses or forest spirits, but they do highlight how unpredictable and dangerous wilderness environments can be, and how even experienced outdoors people can vanish without explanation. This historical context helps explain why stories of lost hunters and unexplained vanishings capture our imagination so powerfully.
Chapter 10. Haunting Vision. Night descended over the forbidden glade with a sudden, unnatural heaviness. The hunters huddled close, their flashlights and dim lanterns flickering against the oppressive darkness. Even the fire they attempted to light seemed reluctant, casting shadows that slithered along the edges like living creatures.
Every breath they drew felt thick, weighed down by the forest itself. It was Henry who first saw it, a fleeting pale figure among the trees. At first he thought it was a trick of the firelight, a reflection of his own fear. But as he blinked, the figure remained, gliding silently, impossibly tall, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce his very soul. He froze, unable to call out without betraying his panic. And slowly, the figure disappeared behind a thicket. Thomas noticed Henry's rigid stance. "What is it?" he asked quietly, stepping closer. But before Henry could answer, more visions appeared. Shadows that moved against the natural flow of the forest, fleeting glimpses of hunters who had vanished before, their faces twisted in silent screams. The forest whispered their names, taunting them with reminders of their impending fate. One by one, each hunter began to see their own haunting visions, some familiar, some entirely alien, all terrifying. The forest seemed to pulse with intent, bending reality around them. Trees shifted, the ground trembled slightly, and the whispers rose in urgency. The hunters realized that the glade was more than a physical trap. It was a psychological one. Every fear, every regret, every doubt was amplified, brought to life by forces beyond comprehension. Sleep had abandoned them, leaving their minds raw, vulnerable to the forest's manipulations. A sudden scream erupted, this time from Samuel, who had been silent until now. His eyes were wide with terror, staring at an empty patch of ground. "I see them."
"James, the others, they're here," he cried. But when the group rushed to the spot, nothing remained but the dense mist curling around the trees. The forest had given them a glimpse of their fate, or perhaps it was showing them what they feared most, that disappearance was inevitable and resistance was futile. Next, we discover the hidden trail that may hold clues to surviving the forest, and why following it could be the hunter's only hope, or their ultimate doom. Chapter 11. The Hidden Trail. The forest seemed endless, a living maze that refused to yield. The hunters, weary and trembling, had been wandering for hours, or was it days? Time felt meaningless under the oppressive canopy. Every step seemed heavier than the last, as though the forest itself was pressing against them, testing their endurance, their sanity. It was Thomas who noticed it first, a narrow, barely visible path, winding through the dense undergrowth. Unlike the other trails, this one bore no strange markings or carved symbols. It was subtle, almost hesitant, as if the forest itself had left a clue, intentionally or unintentionally. "Perhaps it's a way out," he whispered, uncertainty and hope mixing in his voice. The others clustered around, wary but desperate. As they followed the trail, the air seemed to shift. The oppressive heaviness that had weighed on them all day lightened slightly, and the whispers seemed more distant. For the first time since entering the forest, the hunters dared to imagine escape. Yet, each step forward was met with the subtle sense of being observed. Shadows lingered just beyond sight, moving fluidly, teasing them with glimpses of what might, or might not, be real. Henry stumbled upon a set of footprints, faint and partially obscured by the leaf litter. They weren't his, or anyone else's in the group. "Someone else has been this way," he said quietly, pointing. The hunters exchanged nervous glances. Who or what could be in the forest besides them? Could it be a previous hunter, a trick of the mind, or something far darker? As they pressed on, the trail began to twist and fork unexpectedly. Each turn presented a choice: left, where the trees grew unnaturally close and the shadows thickened; right, where a faint light glimmered far in the distance, promising safety or deception. Thomas hesitated, sensing the forest's watchful breeze, its weighing instinct against hope. "Whatever this trail is," he said finally, "it's not natural.
but it may be the only chance we have to survive. Even as they moved, the forest whispered, not just names, but warnings, threats, fragments of sentences that seemed to weave in and out of comprehension. The hunters could feel the tension pressing on them, their nerves stretched taut, their fear palpable. Somewhere deep in the woods, the shadows were gathering, waiting. The trail was real, or as real as the forest allowed them to perceive. Next, we discover the mysterious cabin hidden deep in the forest, and why the hunters' hope may be nothing more than a trap.
Chapter 12. The Cabin of Shadows. The narrow trail twisted deeper into the forest, leading the hunters through thickets so dense that sunlight barely touched the ground. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, every step echoing unnervingly. Then, in the distance, a structure emerged, a small, weathered cabin, partially hidden by the towering trees. Its dark timbered walls seemed older than memory, and a faint plume of smoke curled from the chimney, despite the forest's stillness. The hunters exchanged wary glances. "Who would be here?" muttered Henry. No village lay near, and no human had crossed this part of Blackwood for decades, or so the stories claimed. Thomas motioned for caution. "This could be a trap," he warned, "but it may also hold answers, or at least shelter." Fear and hope warred within the group as they approached the cabin, every shadow stretching like hands reaching for them. As they neared, the forest fell unnaturally silent. The whispers, the laughter, even the rustling leaves had vanished, replaced by an eerie stillness. The door, dark and heavy, creaked ominously as Thomas pushed it open. Inside, the cabin was empty, but signs of recent use were unmistakable. A cold hearth held the faint scent of burned wood, and scattered tools and hunting gear lay as if someone had left in a hurry. Henry's eyes were drawn to the walls, covered with crude sketches. Hunters, forests, strange symbols interwoven with human forms. The drawings pulsed with a life of their own, shifting subtly when no one was looking. It was as if the cabin itself remembered past horrors, documenting the forest's victims in silent testimony. The hunters felt the weight of the place pressing down on them, and an almost instinctive dread filled their hearts. Suddenly, a soft creak echoed from above, a floorboard shifting somewhere in the loft. Every hunter froze, rifles raised. The shadows seemed to gather at the edges of the cabin, reaching, observing, waiting. Then, from the loft, a faint whisper drifted down, their names, one by one, in tones too close to human, yet wrong, alien. The forest had followed them here. The cabin was not a refuge, it was another part of the trap. Thomas signaled for silence, heart hammering. "We must stay vigilant," he murmured. "This cabin, it shows us what the forest wants us to see, and hides what it plans to do." Every instinct screamed that staying would be dangerous, but leaving meant stepping back into the forest's living nightmare. Next, we discover the voices in the mist, and why the hunters begin to question what is real and what is a vision.
Chapter 13. Voices in the Mist. A thick mist rolled into the forest as night approached, curling through the trees like spectral fingers. The hunters huddled together near the cabin, their breaths shallow and rapid, their senses on high alert. The mist carried a strange chill, dampening the warmth of their fire and muffling the forest's usual sounds. For a moment, it seemed the world had been swallowed whole, leaving only the hunters and the unseen presence that followed them. Then came the voices. Soft at first, almost gentle, calling out their names. Henry froze, eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Thomas strained to listen, but the words were indistinct, carried on the mist like echoes of memories that weren't theirs. The voices grew louder, layering over one another, overlapping, sometimes pleading, sometimes mocking. It was impossible to discern whether they came from the forest or from within their own minds. As the hunters cautiously moved forward, the mist thickened, wrapping around their legs and slipping between them like water. Shadows flitted just beyond sight, vanishing when directly looked at. Each step seemed to twist the path behind them, turning familiar clearings into alien landscapes. The forest's whispers now held intent, directing, warning, and threatening simultaneously.
The line between reality and hallucination blurred, leaving the hunters unsure if they were truly moving or simply trapped in the forest's illusion. One by one, each hunter reported seeing figures in the mist, friends who had vanished, strangers with hollow eyes, shapes that mimicked human form but moved unnaturally. Every encounter left them shaken, doubt seeping into every thought. Could they trust their senses? Or had Blackwood begun to manipulate perception itself? Even Thomas, their guide and voice of reason, found himself second-guessing each decision as the night deepened. The mist thickened into an almost tangible presence. The hunters huddled together, murmuring prayers, gripping rifles, hearts hammering. Every rustle, every whisper, every distant sound became a threat. The forest had learned patience. It had learned fear. And now, it fed on it. Next, we discover the lost diary hidden in the cabin, and why its revelations may be the key to understanding or escaping the forest's dark intent.
Chapter 14. The Lost Diary. The hunters returned cautiously to the cabin at dawn, hearts heavy with the restless night spent among whispers and shadows. The mist had begun to lift, leaving the forest damp and silent, but the oppressive feeling remained, an unseen weight pressing against their chests. As they moved inside, Thomas noticed a loose floorboard near the hearth. Kneeling, he pried it open, revealing a small, weathered, leather-bound diary. Its pages yellowed with age. Henry gingerly picked it up, brushing off decades of dust. The handwriting was cramped, hurried, almost frantic. As he flipped through the pages, the hunters gathered around, spellbound. The diary belonged to a hunter who had entered Blackwood decades earlier and had chronicled the same strange occurrences: shifting paths, whispers, disappearing companions, and the forest's eerie sentience. Every entry was a mixture of observation and fear, revealing a deepening terror that mirrored the hunter's own experiences. Thomas read aloud passages that chilled them to the bone. The trees remember every footstep. They watch when you sleep. They take what they desire. We thought we were hunters, but in truth we were prey. The forest is patient, but it never forgets. Those who stray are swallowed, not by beasts, but by the will of Blackwood itself. The words resonated with the hunter's current reality, igniting a shared understanding. They were in the same trap, only it was far from over. The diary also hinted at a pattern. Hunters who followed the forest's subtle clues sometimes survived, but only those who resisted curiosity at crucial moments. It mentioned a hidden glade, a place of both peril and revelation, suggesting that the forest's intelligence could be read, but never fully trusted. Shadows, whispers, and symbols were all part of a system designed to ensnare the unwary. Every detail mattered. Very misstep could be fatal. The hunters absorbed the grim knowledge in silence, feeling the forest's presence pressing even closer, as if aware of their discovery. The diary was a warning, a guide, and a mirror of what awaited them. For the first time, they realized that survival depended not just on courage or skill, but on understanding the forest's dark logic and staying one step ahead of it. Next, we discover the forest awakening fully, and why the hunters soon realized that Blackwood is more than a place. It is a living, conscious predator. Chapter 15. The Forest Awakens. The sun barely pierced the thick canopy, leaving the hunters in a perpetual twilight that blurred the line between day and night. The forest had changed. What had once been subtle whispers and fleeting shadows now surged with purpose, as if Blackwood itself had woken to fully acknowledge its intruders. Every rustle, every snapping branch carried intent, a deliberate signal that the hunters were no longer merely wandering, they were being hunted. Thomas led cautiously, clutching the lost diary, now a lifeline to the forest's mysteries. The deeper they went, the more alive the woods felt. Trees twisted toward them as they walked, branches stretching like claws. Shadows moved independently of light, creeping, twisting, and pulsing. Even the ground seemed uneven, subtly shifting beneath their feet, creating the illusion that paths opened and closed at will. Suddenly, a guttural, inhuman roar echoed through the woods. It was neither animal nor human, yet it resonated with the hunters' own fear, vibrating in their chests. The forest had found its voice. Whispers rose around them, overlapping into a chorus of threats and taunts. Every man felt it pressing in from all directions, a consciousness aware of their thoughts, their fear, even their plans. The diary's warnings were no longer theoretical. The forest's sentience was undeniable. Henry stumbled over a root, nearly falling, and glimpsed movement out of the corner of his eye. Figures, some human-like, some grotesquely distorted, watched him from behind the trees, vanishing the moment he turned his gaze. The forest was teaching them, mocking them, and subtly guiding them toward inevitable terror. Every instinct screamed retreat, but every step forward was irresistible, as if the forest's will was intertwined with their own. By nightfall, the hunters realized that survival was no longer a battle, but navigating the forest. They were in a game of perception, where the forest shaped reality to feed on their fear. Shadows became walls, whispers became commands, and even the diary offered guidance that was partial, cryptic, and potentially dangerous. Blackwood was awake, fully aware, and patient. Its hunger was methodical, its trap was perfect. Next, we discover the hunters' final confrontation with the forest, and why the first hunt may seal their fates forever.
Chapter 16. The Final Hunt. Night had fully claimed Blackwood Forest, and the hunters were no longer walking. They were running, guided by desperation rather than hope. The forest seemed alive in every sense. Trees twisted to block paths, shadows leapt across trails, and whispers pursued them relentlessly, mocking and threatening in equal measure. Every instinct screamed that the forest was no longer just a setting, it was a predator, and they were its prey. Thomas tried to rally the group, using the diary as a guide, but even he struggled to read the forest's intent. Every choice seemed wrong, every path a trap. As they pressed deeper into the woods, the rustling grew louder, sharper, almost as if the trees themselves were closing in. Shapes moved in the periphery, flickering between human and something monstrous, their intentions unreadable. Fear clawed at their minds with a ferocity stronger than hunger or pain. One by one, the hunters faltered. Samuel tripped, vanishing in a swirl of mist and whispers, leaving only a faint echo of his scream. Henry and the others stumbled into hidden depressions in the earth, nearly falling into hidden ravines, narrowly saved by Thomas's quick reflexes. The forest seemed to anticipate every movement, adapting, testing, punishing mistakes. The diary's warnings became clearer in moments of terror. Blackwood did not merely hunt the body, it hunted the mind. Every fear, every doubt, every flicker of curiosity was a weapon the forest wielded expertly. The hunters realized that their survival depended not on fighting the forest, but on understanding its logic and staying calm. A near impossible task, as hallucinations and shadows closed in from all sides. By midnight, exhaustion and panic had thinned the group. The forest whispered promises and threats, laughter and lamentations blending into a symphony of terror. There was no retreat, none, or real escape. Only one thing was certain: the forest would claim what it wanted, and the hunters would need every ounce of courage and cunning to survive this final hunt. Next, we discover the shadows closing in and why every hunter must confront the forest's will, or risk vanishing like those who came before. Disclaimer: this story is purely fiction. Chapter 17. Shadows Closing In. The forest had changed completely. Every tree, every shadow, every rustle of leaves carried intent, as if the very air conspired against the hunters. The dim light of their dwindling fire could no longer hold back the darkness that pressed from all sides. Whispers, once distant and teasing, now roared in their ears, each syllable a threat, each pause a trap. Thomas led the group cautiously, but the trail had vanished. The paths they thought familiar twisted and folded into themselves. Shapes flickered just beyond sight. Figures humanoid yet distorted, moving silently with deliberate purpose. Every hunter felt a brush of cold against their skin, as if the shadows themselves were reaching for them. Panic began to fracture their unity. Some clung to the firelight, others stumbled blindly into the darkness. Henry's breathing was ragged. "They're everywhere. It's all around us," he whispered, voice shaking. Samuel, who had been quiet for hours, whimpered, and pointed into the mist. The shadows were coalescing, forming shapes taller than men, bending the forest's branches into grotesque, grasping limbs. It was no longer camouflage. The forest itself had become predator. Thomas held up the diary, trying to find guidance, but even its pages seemed to shimmer, changing subtly under the dim light. The forest was aware of them, reading their fear, their decisions, their very thoughts. A sudden scream cut through the air, echoing unnaturally, followed by a chorus of whispers that seemed to mimic every hunter's voice. The hunters realized the terrifying truth. Resistance was meaningless unless they understood the forest's will, and that understanding alone might not be enough. One by one, shadows reached forward, tendrils of darkness wrapping around the hunters, pulling, twisting, testing. Each man confronted the living forest in his own way. Some fought, some prayed, some froze. The whispers promised safety if they obeyed, threatened doom if they faltered, and mocked their every hesitation. By the time the mist thickened into an impenetrable shroud, the hunters understood that Blackwood was patient, and it had all the time in the world. Next, we discover the hunters' final campfire, and why their last night in the forest may determine if any of them survive. Chapter 18. The Last Campfire. The hunters stumbled through the dense undergrowth, their bodies exhausted, their minds frayed from endless whispers and shifting shadows. The forest had fully awakened, and every step felt like walking into the jaws of a predator. Desperation drove them to set up one final campfire in a small clearing, hoping its weak glow might offer some comfort, or at least delay the inevitable. The flames flickered against the trees, throwing grotesque shadows that danced like living things. Every crackle of firewood was amplified in the oppressive silence, and the hunters flinched at every rustle in the brush. The diary lay open beside Thomas, its pages offering fragments of guidance, but nothing guaranteed safety. Blackwood was patient. It had already claimed James, Samuel, and nearly all their confidence. Henry huddled close to the fire, eyes darting to every shadow. "It's watching us," he whispered. "It's waiting for us to make a mistake." Thomas nodded, aware that any misstep could be fatal. The forest's whispers had grown into a relentless roar of voices, overlapping, echoing, shaping the men's fears into illusions so real that even rational thought faltered. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the trees, forming a figure both human and distorted, staring directly at them. It moved with deliberate slowness, testing, teasing, feeding on their fear. Every hunter froze, rifles useless against an enemy that was both everywhere and nowhere. The forest seemed to pulse in response to their terror, the ground trembling, the trees bending closer. The fire became their fragile anchor, the only line between them and total darkness. Each hunter realized they were not merely fighting survival, they were fighting perception itself. Every whisper, every shadow, every flicker of the fire tested their courage and sanity. Blackwood demanded attention, demanded respect, and demanded fear. The last campfire became a battlefield not of bullets or blades, but of willpower and understanding, an arena where only those who truly comprehended the forest's intent could hope to survive. Next, we discover which hunters make it through the night, and why the forest may not release them even if they survive. Chapter 19. Dawn of Survival. The first light of dawn barely penetrated the dense canopy, but it was enough to reveal the aftermath of the night. The forest was eerily silent, as if holding its breath after a hunt. The hunters who remained alive stirred around the last campfire, faces pale, bodies trembling, and hearts still racing from the relentless terror of the previous night. The forest had tested them, and some had survived, though only barely. Thomas counted the group. 17 had entered Blackwood. Now only a handful remained. James, Samuel, and others had vanished, claimed by the forest in ways that words could not fully explain. The survivors were shaken, each haunted not only by what they had witnessed, but by what they imagined still lurked in the shadows. Even the diary, once a source of guidance, felt fragile and incomplete, offering knowledge that seemed only half true in the face of Blackwood's full power. Henry looked around at the twisted, looming trees. We made it through the night," he whispered, disbelief mixed with relief. Yet even as the words left his mouth, a rustle in the underbrush made every man tense. The forest was patient, and though dawn had come, its will had not ended. Every branch, every shadow seemed to hint that survival was only temporary, a reprieve, not a victory. Thomas, holding the diary close, spoke with quiet authority. "We survived because we understood one thing," he said. "The forest doesn't hunt blindly. It studies. It tests. It punishes mistakes. If we leave, we do so by respecting its power, by keeping our wits, and by never underestimating what we've witnessed here." The hunters nodded, absorbing the bitter lesson. Blackwood had spared them, for now, but the memory of its intelligence, its malice, and its patience would follow them forever. Even as they prepared to leave the clearing, the forest seemed to shift. Subtly, shadows curling and stretching along the paths. Blackwood did not chase. They had survived by understanding its rules, but it would remember. Every step out of the forest was a silent promise. Come back unprepared, and the forest would claim them without hesitation. Next, we discover the final escape and why the forest may never truly release the hunters from its influence. Chapter 20. Blackwood's Memory. The survivors stepped cautiously along the narrow trail that finally led them out of Blackwood Forest. The first rays of morning sun touched their faces, warming them in a way they had almost forgotten. Relief coursed through their exhausted bodies, but it was fragile, tinged with fear. Blackwood was behind them, yet its presence lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. Thomas led the group silently, glancing over his shoulder. Every tree, every patch of shadow seemed to watch them even as they left. The diary had guided them through the forest's traps, its shifting paths, and its whispers, but no words could erase what they had seen or felt. James, Samuel, and the others had vanished, leaving only memories of their screams and the forest's laughter echoing in their minds. Survival had a price. Henry shivered, the horrors of the night etched into every line of his face. "Do you think it will follow us?" he asked, voice barely audible. Thomas shook his head, though uncertainty clouded his expression. "Blackwood doesn't chase," he replied. "It waits. It remembers. Every hunter who enters is catalogued, every fear recorded. We escaped, but the forest's memory is long, and it never forgets." As they emerged onto open ground, the dense canopy behind them felt impossibly distant, yet the memory of Blackwood remained vivid. The whispers, the shadows, the shifting paths, the laughter, the cryptic symbols. Every survivor knew something fundamental had changed. The forest had marked them, not physically, but deep within their minds. Even far from its reach, every rustle of leaves, every flicker of shadow, would remind them of Blackwood's sentience. The survivors walked on, shoulders tight with tension, hearts still racing, minds haunted. Blackwood had tested them, broken some, spared others, and in doing so, left a legacy of fear that could never fully be shaken. They had escaped the forest, but the forest's memory would forever haunt the edges of their vision, the whispers of their dreams, and the silence between the trees. The legend of Blackwood lives on, a warning to any who dare enter. Some forests remember, some hunt, and some never forgive.